Long before cages, before tournaments, medals, or movie stars, before belts, ranks, and rules, there was only survival and the warrior. On frozen steppes and jungle floors, in dusty temples and hidden caves, human beings learned to fight, not for glory, but for life. From the monks of Shaolin to the masked wrestlers of Mexico, from the tribes of Africa and Native America to the samurai of Japan and the gladiators of Rome, a single truth echoed through every age, every nation. The body is a weapon, but the mind is the master. This is not just a story about fighting. It is a journey through thousands of years of human struggle, spirit, and survival. It is the true story of martial arts, not as entertainment, but as philosophy, as culture, as medicine, as a sacred bridge between life and death, violence and peace, discipline and freedom. So tighten your stance, still your breath, because you are about to enter a world where every movement has meaning, every strike tells a story, and every culture adds a chapter to the legend. This is the origin and evolution of martial arts. If you're fascinated by ancient secrets, warrior wisdom, and the lost history of human combat, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay with us through this epic journey. From the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Japan, you've never seen martial arts like this before. Chapter 1: The Dawn of Combat, Martial Arts Before Civilization. Before there were names, before the codes of the samurai, before monks etched their wisdom into movements, there was only survival. The birthplace of combat, instinct before art. Long before the concept of martial arts existed, humans fought not for glory, not for honor, but for life itself. Imagine the earliest tribes wandering through primal landscapes, where danger came not only from predators, but from rival humans. A rock, a sharpened stick, or a heavy bone wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon, wielded with instinct and desperation. This was not yet art. It was war in its rawest form. But in time, something changed. Primitive skirmishes became ritualized. Tools evolved into weapons. Pain became a teacher. And from the ashes of violence, the first ideas of structured combat were born. The earliest expressions of martial technique likely came from tribal societies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, where daily life was a struggle for survival. Wrestling, the world's oldest martial art, appears in the oldest cave paintings known to archaeology. From the Tassili Najjar caves in Algeria to Babylonian stone reliefs, we see images of grappling men locked in combat art dating back over 7,000 years. In these tribes, young warriors were trained through games of physical dominance, holds, throws, and endurance trials. It wasn't about victory. It was about who could protect the tribe, who could face the lion, who could die last. The first tools of martial combat were crude, but effective clubs, slings, spears. In prehistoric China, polished stone knives and spears became ritual weapons, passed from generation to generation. Not only were they tools of war, but they carried symbolic power, the strength of the ancestors, the soul of the tribe. Across ancient Africa and early Mesopotamia, warriors began to stylize their movements. A downward strike, a wide sweep, a guarded stance. These weren't yet codified martial forms, but they were becoming more than chaos. They were slowly becoming systems. The Sumerian influence, the first organized armies. By 3000 BCE, civilization had taken root in Sumer, one of the world's first great city-states. Here, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, warfare became formal. Soldiers were trained, drilled, and formed into ranks. The concept of training for war, not just fighting when needed, was born. Sumerian tablets show images of organized combat, with spears and shields used in formation. These were the ancestors of what we now call martial disciplines. It wasn't sport. It wasn't personal. It was national. But martial movement was not always about death. In ancient Egypt, tomb paintings from 2000 BCE depict men wrestling and stick fighting in organized matches. These weren't always fatal encounters. Many were ritualistic or sport-based, training young men to be strong, agile, and capable of defending the community. Egyptian stick fighting, known as tatib, was used for both warfare and ceremonial dance. Movements were passed down through families and often involved spiritual preparation. The fighter didn't just train the body, he purified the mind. Here, martial arts began to separate from mere violence. They became culture. They became identity. As civilization spread, so too did the desire to protect, to conquer, and to control. In the Indus Valley, evidence suggests structured combat training was part of daily life, possibly including the early roots of what would become Kalaripayattu, India's famed martial tradition. Farther north, the Eurasian steppes birthed nomadic warrior tribes, Scythians, Huns, and later Mongols, who developed horseback combat and archery techniques still unmatched in precision. For them, war was life, and combat was an art of movement, speed, and surprise. Though many of these traditions were never written down, their essence lived on in the disciplines that would follow. Primitive man fought with muscle, but as time passed, the greatest warriors fought with mind. Even the earliest civilizations realized that brute strength was not enough. The fighters who lived longest weren't always the strongest. They were the ones who could read an opponent, who could adapt in the moment. The ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu, writing around 500 BCE, would later declare, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." But centuries before him, tribal chiefs and elder warriors were already practicing this wisdom disguised as caution, cunning, or simply surviving. This shift from instinct to strategy would define the evolution of martial arts for the next 5,000 years. Who were the first true martial artists? Not kings, not generals, but unknown men and women, training in the early hours, teaching sons and daughters how to move, how to fight, how to live. They had no black belts, no scrolls, no tournaments, just scars and silence, and skill earned by fire. Before the first monk stood beneath a waterfall, before the samurai drew his blade, there was a boy learning to wrestle, a girl learning to hunt, and a teacher who had seen the cost of losing. This was the beginning. Chapter 2: China's Ancient Legacy, Shaolin Kung Fu, and Wudang Origins. In the heart of ancient China, where mountains meet mist and rivers carved the land like calligraphy, a new kind of warrior emerged, one who fought not only with fists and feet, but with spirit. Long before the rise of the famed Shaolin Temple, China was already a land rich in martial philosophy and physical discipline. In ancient texts from the Zhou dynasty, refrencies are made to Wu Yi, martial skills taught to soldiers and royal guards. These arts included weapon training, archery, wrestling, and horse riding. Warriors were expected to be cultured and deadly, poets with swords, philosophers in armor. But martial skill was not the exclusive domain of soldiers. Farmers used staffs to defend their land. Merchants learned open-hand defense for the roads. Even scholars practiced health-based movements that would one day evolve into what we now call Tai Chi. What unified these different strands was a deep respect for nature, balance, and the flow of energy, what the Chinese would call Qi. The arrival of Bodhidharma, legend and legacy. According to Chinese legend, everything changed in the 5th or 6th century when an Indian monk named Bodhidharma crossed the Himalayas and arrived at the gates of the Shaolin Monastery in Henan province. He found the monks weak in body, unable to sit in meditation for long hours without falling ill or asleep. So Bodhidharma taught them a set of exercises known as the Yi Jing Jing, the muscle tendon changing classic. These routines were based on Indian yogic movements, but adapted to Chinese sensibilities and internal energy theory. Over time, these physical disciplines were blended with Taoist and Buddhist philosophy, forming the foundation of what we now call Shaolin Kung Fu. Kung Fu, meaning skill achieved through hard work, was not a single style, but a universe of forms. Tiger, crane, snake, mantis, drunken, monkey, and more. Every move was a metaphor, every form a lesson. But the Shaolin Temple did not remain isolated forever. Bandits, warlords, and foreign invaders often threatened the peace of the monastery. So the monks trained not just in spirit, but in real combat. They became experts in staff fighting, swordplay, acrobatics, and endurance. By the Tang Dynasty, Shaolin monks were serving as elite bodyguards and even fought in defense of emperors. Historical records describe Shaolin monks leaping into battle to rescue princes or defend the temple from armed rebels. These were not myths. These were warrior monks feared and respected across the empire. One scroll tells of a monk who single-handedly fought off dozens of bandits with nothing but a wooden staff. His legend would inspire generations of martial artists. The Wudang Mountains, Taoist martial arts, and inner alchemy. While Shaolin represented the external or hard, martial arts focused on strength, speed, and explosive power. Another tradition was developing in the misty peaks of the Wudang Mountains. Here, Taoist monks followed the path of stillness. They believed true power came not from force, but from harmony with nature. Thus was born Tai Chi Chuan, a martial art that looked like a slow dance, but concealed devastating martial technique within its fluidity. Tai Chi, along with Baguazhang and Xing Yi Quan, formed the foundation of internal martial arts, where control of breath, intent, and energy flow were as important as muscle and speed. These arts emphasized evasion over aggression, yielding over domination. To win was not to crush your opponent, but to make him defeat himself. In China, martial arts were never just about fighting. They were extensions of philosophy. Confucianism taught loyalty, respect, and discipline. Taoism emphasized harmony, spontaneity, and going with the flow. Buddhism instilled mindfulness, compassion, and detachment. The martial artist was not a brawler, but a bridge between heaven and earth. A person who could kill, but chose not to. Who could dominate, but preferred peace. In many schools, students were first taught etiquette before ever learning to strike. They bowed, cleaned the dojo, meditated, because to master the fist, one had to first master the self. Chinese martial arts drew inspiration not only from philosophy, but from nature itself. The 5 animal forms tiger, crane, leopard, snake, and dragon were more than mimicked animals. Each represented a mindset. Tiger, ferocity and dominance. Crane, grace and precision. Leopard, speed and aggression. Snake, flexibility and control. Dragon, spirit and unpredictability. Later, other animals were added: mantis, monkey, eagle, even frog. Martial artists studied these creatures in the wild and transformed their survival instincts into fighting styles. Weapons also became extensions of the body. The staff, called the grandfather of all weapons. The sword, a symbol of nobility and precision. The spear, hook swords, chain whips, fans, each with its own lineage and legend. Every weapon was a philosophy, every strike a verse. As China changed, so did its martial traditions. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, Kung Fu was both revered and feared. Rebels and revolutionaries trained in secret, using martial arts as a tool of resistance. Martial clans were born, each with secret styles passed through generations. Some taught only to family, others to chosen disciples. Then came modernization and suppression. In the 20th century, many martial arts schools were closed during political turmoil. But the spirit survived, carried by masters who fled to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, and eventually to the world. Kung Fu became a global symbol of Eastern mysticism and power, thanks in large part to the next chapter in this journey: Bruce Lee, cinema, and the birth of modern martial arts fusion. In the silence of stone halls, in the whisper of bamboo forests, the ancient Chinese martial artists listened, not to the sounds of war, but to the stillness within. Chapter 3: India's Forgotten Warriors, Kalaripayattu and Vedic Combat. Long before the Shaolin Temple rose from mist, long before the samurai drew steel in Japan, there was another land, rich in rhythm and war. A land where breath, battle, and body were one. India, the cradle of codified combat. India, the subcontinent of sages, scriptures, and silence, is rarely the first place the world imagines when thinking of martial prowess. But this ancient land, older than legend, is where the world's first structured martial art likely began. Long before Kung Fu was born in China, before the Olympic wrestlers of Greece, there was Kalaripayattu, the art of the battlefield. Not just a martial art, but a complete science of war. Kalaripayattu, the mother of all martial arts? Kalaripayattu originates in the southern Indian state of Kerala. Its name comes from Kalari, a training arena or combat school. Payattu, to fight, exercise, or practice. This art is over 3,000 years old and may date back to the Sangam period, but its spirit is far older, rooted in the Vedas, the ancient texts that shaped India's soul. It teaches strikes, grappling, acrobatics, and weapons. Yes, but it also teaches healing. Kalaripayattu masters were warriors and physicians, trained in the sister science of Ayurveda. They knew how to strike and how to restore. Movements are poetic, flowing, and circular. They mimic animals: lion, elephant, snake, and peacock. Combat is taught through forms, like a sacred dance. A fight becomes a ritual. Violence becomes rhythm. The warrior in the Vedas, ancient origins of Indian combat. The Rig Veda, India's oldest scripture, speaks of celestial battles and divine warriors. Its hymns praise gods like Indra, who wields the thunderbolt, and Rudra, the fierce archer. But the Vedas don't just speak in metaphors. They describe Dhanurveda, the science of archery, as one of the 4 auxiliary Vedas. This ancient manual laid the foundation for battlefield tactics, weapon use, and mental training. Warriors of Vedic India trained in Vajramushti, a brutal form of fist-fighting using knuckle dusters. Musti Yuddha, bare-knuckle boxing with elbows, knees, and headbutts. Dhanurvidya, archery, swordplay, mace combat, spear fighting. Charioteering and horse riding. Combat was both spiritual and strategic. Before battle, warriors meditated. They recited mantras. War was not chaos, it was dharma, a sacred duty. The Kshatriya code warrior ethics of ancient India. The warrior caste in India, known as Kshatriyas, were bound by an ethical code similar to the Japanese Bushido. A true warrior was disciplined in body and mind, fearless in battle, but humble in peace, skilled in multiple weapons, educated in scriptures, philosophy, and statcraft, responsible for protecting the weak and upholding justice. This ideal was embodied by legendary figures like Arjuna, the peerless archer of the Mahabharata; Rama, the ideal king and divine bowman; Karna, the noble yet doomed warrior who fought with honor; Bhishma, who vowed celibacy and loyalty for the sake of duty. These were not just myths. Their archetypes shaped the real warrior class for millennia. Kalaripayattu as a way of life, not just war. Unlike modern sports-based martial arts, Kalaripayattu was holistic. Training included Maipayattu, stretching, stances, jumps, and animal forms; Kolthari, bo staff, curved sticks, and short cudgels; Angathari, swords, spears, shields, daggers; Virunkai, grappling, locks, pressure point attacks. Marma Vidya, mastery of 108 vital spots on the body. Healing arts, use of herbs, massage, and energy channels for recovery. Masters, known as Gurukhuls, passed this knowledge orally through decades of silent observation and practice. The Gurukhul was not just a trainer. He was part doctor, part spiritual guide, and part warrior king. Marma Vidya, the forgotten science of vital strikes. One of the most mysterious elements of Indian martial tradition is Marma Vidya, the science of striking pressure points, similar to Chinese acupuncture but weaponized. The body was mapped into 108 marmas. A trained fighter could paralyze with a touch, knock out with minimal force, even kill with a delayed strike. To learn marma, a student had to prove moral integrity. It was sacred knowledge, never taught to the reckless. This hidden science was said to influence early Chinese key theory brought across the Himalayas by monks and travelers long before records were kept. Suppression and survival, the fall and rise of Kalari. By the 16th century, Kalaripayattu faced its first major blow. When the Portuguese and later the British colonized India, they banned Kalari and disarmed the warrior castes. Kalari schools were burned, weapons seized, masters imprisoned. Why? Because a trained populace was harder to conquer. But Kalari survived in temples, in dance schools, in villages where old masters trained students in secrecy. It lived through Kathakali and Thayam traditional dances that concealed martial movements. In the 20th century, thanks to Indian independence and martial revivalism, Kalaripayattu returned from the shadows. Gurukhuls began teaching again, first to locals, then to the world. Today, Kalari is taught in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. It has even reached the West, but few know its true history. Kalaripayattu's hidden global influence. Some historians argue that Kalaripayattu is the mother of all Asian martial arts. Here's why. Bodhidharma, the monk who brought Kung Fu to China, was Indian. Many believe he was trained in Kalari, or a similar Indian discipline. Kalari's animal forms and energy principles mirror those later seen in Kung Fu. Indian naval traders and Buddhist monks brought martial arts to Southeast Asia, possibly influencing Silat in Indonesia and Muay Boran in Thailand. Though undocumented, these influences run deep. Kalari, though little known today, may be the ancient root that fed many branches of the martial tree. In dusty arenas beneath coconut palms, on sun-baked earth by torchlight, the warriors of India moved like poetry, not to conquer the world, but to master themselves. Chapter 4. The Way of the Sword, Japan's Samurai, Bushido, and Martial Perfection. In a land where cherry blossoms fall like blood on silk, where silence weighs heavier than speech, and where a single sword stroke can decide a man's fate, a warrior code was born, not just to fight, but to live and die with honor. Japan, the island where spirit and steel became one. Japan isolated, volcanic, and fiercely disciplined. Here, martial arts were more than combat, they were a way of being. While India gave the world holistic combat, and China offered energy-based systems, Japan gave structure, ritual, and a code. Bushido, the way of the warrior. At the heart of Japan's martial legacy stood a class of elite fighters, the samurai. But the samurai were not merely warriors. They were philosophers, poets, statesmen, and monks of the battlefield. The samurai emerged during the Heian period, becoming the dominant warrior class during the Kamakura period. They served feudal lords, known as daimyo, and pledged absolute loyalty. Their weapon of choice? The katana, a curved blade forged with divine precision. To the samurai, the sword was not a tool. It was a soul. Martial training for a samurai included kenjutsu, the art of sword fighting; iejutsu, the art of drawing and striking in one fluid motion; kyujutsu, archery from foot and horseback; Jiu-jitsu, grappling without weapons. Sojutsu, spear fighting. Tantojutsu, dagger combat. Each art was taught in Rayar, or schools of martial lineage like Katori Shinto-ryu or Kashima Shinto-ryu, some still in existence today. Bushido wasn't a book or a law. It was a silent way of life. Codified during the Edo period, Bushido emphasized, Ji, do what is right, not what is easy. Yu, bravery in battle and in peace. Jin, show mercy when others cannot. Rei, courtesy to all, even enemies. Makoto, speak truthfully, act with integrity. Meiyo, reputation is worth more than life. Chidi, faithful to your master, even unto death. A samurai who failed this code would perform seppuku ritual suicide to restore honor. In a world ruled by steel, character was sharper than the blade. Kajujutsu, the art of the bow and the soul. Before the katana, the bow ruled the battlefield. Kyujutsu was a divine discipline. The yumi, or Japanese longbow, was asymmetrical taller than a man and required years to master. Samurai trained in yabusan, shooting targets from galloping horses, and kisha, bow combat. Archery was said to connect warrior and spirit. In fact, even after the bow faded from battlefields, it evolved into Kaido, the bow, a meditative martial art still practiced today. Every shot is a ritual. Every arrow, a prayer. Jiu-jitsu, the soft art of overcoming strength. What if your sword is lost? What if your enemy is larger? Then, the samurai turned to Jutsu, the gentle art. Jiu-jitsu used throws, locks, pins, and strikes. It was the precursor to Judo, Aikido, and Brazilian Jiu-jitsu. Unlike brute force arts, it emphasized leverage over strength, redirection over resistance, calm over chaos. The idea? Use your enemy's force against them. Turn weakness into weapon. In the Edo period, as wars decreased, samurai refined jujitsu into spiritual forms, leading to modern martial disciplines, ninjutsu, shadows, spies, and misunderstood masters. Beyond the polished armor and shining blades were the shadows. Enter the ninja, a word that conjures myths but hides truth. Ninjutsu was not merely assassination. It was espionage, sabotage, survival. Practiced by the Iga and Koga clans, ninjas were trained in stealth movement, disguises and deception, explosives and poisons, climbing, swimming, and wilderness survival. While the samurai fought with honor, the ninja fought with necessity. They were the underdogs of feudal Japan agents, not always assassins. Today, ninjutsu is taught by a handful of surviving lineages, like Bujinkan, but much of it remains wrapped in legend. What made Japanese martial arts unique was not just form but philosophy. Zen Buddhism, imported from China, found a deep home in samurai culture. It taught mindfulness in action, calm in the face of chaos, non-attachment to life or death. A samurai might meditate before a duel, might tend a rock garden after a battle, might compose a death poem before drawing his sword for the last time. To the samurai, victory wasn't always survival. It was dying well. Modern Japan, the birthplace of global martial arts. As feudalism ended in the 19th century, Japan transformed. The sword was outlawed. Samurai vanished. But their spirit lived on in new martial arts, born from old traditions. Judo, created by Jigoro Kano in 1882, the gentle way, focused on throws, grappling, and moral education, became the first modern martial art and Olympic sport. Karate, from Okinawa, influenced by Chinese arts, striking focused with blocks, punches, and kicks, brought to Japan and worldwide in the 20th century. Aikido, created by Morihei Ueshiba, the way of harmony, emphasized blending with attackers. Deeply spiritual, with circular movement and non-violence. These arts combined combat with philosophy. They became paths of self-mastery taught not for war, but for life. Today, Japanese martial arts are everywhere. Judo is an Olympic staple. Karate is practiced in every country. Aikido is taught in dojos worldwide. Jiu-jitsu gave birth to Brazilian Jiu-jitsu, which dominates MMA. The way of the samurai lives on not in bloodshed, but in discipline, respect, and grace under pressure. Where others sought victory, they sought virtue. Where others struck to conquer, they moved to transcend. The sword was not their weapon. The self was. Chapter 5. The Warrior Tribes, Africa, Native America, and Tribal Arts of Survival and Soul. Long before global empires carved borders in blood, before samurai, Spartans, or Shaolin monks, there were tribes. Clans that danced, fought, and survived in harmony with earth and spirit. Their martial arts weren't just about victory. They were about identity, resistance, and connection to ancestors. Martial arts beyond the mainstream. When we hear the term martial arts, minds rush to China, Japan, Greece, or Rome. But the story is incomplete without the martial wisdom of the Zulu warriors of Southern Africa, the capoeira masters of Brazil, the Native American wrestlers and stick fighters, the indigenous battle dances and tactics of every inhabited continent. These arts were not always codified in scrolls or manuals, but they were written in songs, bones, drums, and dust. They were born not in dojos or arenas, but in ritual, resistance, and raw survival. Let's journey through some of the most overlooked but deeply powerful tribal martial traditions in world history. The Zulu and the art of the spear, African martial genius. In 19th century Southern Africa, the world witnessed the rise of a legendary warrior king, Shaka Zulu. But the martial roots of Africa go back millennia to ancient Nubia, Kush, Kemet, and beyond. Shaka's revolution was not just military, it was martial. He replaced long-throwing spears with short stabbing ones, Ikla deadly for close quarters. He introduced the bullhorn formation, a genius tactical design that outmaneuvered enemies with speed and encirclement. He turned young boys into regiments, trained in barefoot endurance, shield tactics, and spiritual initiation. The Zulu shield and spear technicum canto was both practical and ceremonial. Battle was a dance. Movement had rhythm. Victory was tied to ancestors. Their martial spirit continues today through cultural festivals and Zulu stick fighting, called Induku. Capoeira, the art that sang while it fought. Slavery stripped millions of Africans from their homelands, but they carried with them something chains couldn't take: rhythm, memory, resistance. In Brazil, enslaved Africans blended martial movements with music and dance. The result was capoeira. At first glance, capoeira looks like a game. Bodies cartwheel, flip, and sway. Hands rarely touch the ground. A berimbau string instrument sings over drums. But underneath the graceful facade lies a deadly martial art. Low sweeping kicks, deceptive acrobatics, dodges and feints, surprise takedowns. Capoeira was used to escape plantations, protect communities, and preserve culture. It was banned for nearly a century, its practitioners persecuted. But today, capoeira is global. It is art. It is heritage. It is survival through rhythm. Wrestling, the universal language of combat. Across nearly every tribal society, one art stands out as universal: wrestling. Before swords, before guns, before belts and titles, humans wrestled. From the deserts of Sudan to the plains of North America, from Turkish Yagli Jurek oil wrestling to Mongolian BDHE, from Senegalese Long to indigenous North American grappling contests, wrestling was not just a sport, it was a rite of passage, a way to settle disputes, a test of strength, strategy, and endurance, a performance for spirits and crowds alike. In Senegal, for example, Long wrestlers are superstars. Matches involve elaborate ceremonies, talismans, drumming, and hypnotic dances. Victory isn't just about power. It's about channeling ancestral force. The Native American warriors, fighting for land, spirit, and story. The indigenous peoples of the Americas were not homogeneous. They were nations, hundreds of cultures, each with their own martial traditions. The Comanche and the horse. The Comanche nation of the southern plains became the most feared horsemen on the continent. Their ability to fire arrows while hanging off the side of galloping horses, disappear into terrain, perform lightning raids, made them nearly untouchable for decades. Their martial training began at birthrighting, hunting, aiming, and fighting as naturally as breathing. The Apache and guerrilla tactics. The Apache were masters of ambush warfare and survival combat. Using terrain, stealth, and sabotage, they resisted colonization far longer than expected. The Inuit and survival combat. In the Arctic, the Inuit used bone, ice, and sinew to create weapons and defensive tools. They trained in unarmed grappling, throwing techniques, and environmental adaptation, crucial for close-quarters combat in snow and ice. Native American stick fighting and tomahawk arts. Many tribes practiced forms of stick fighting, blunt weapon sparring, and knife combat. The tomahawk, a tool and weapon, was often used in short-range warfare with tremendous skill. Martial arts among Native Americans were not just about defense, they were deeply tied to ceremony, warrior societies, and the natural world. Dance as martial art, combat hidden in celebration. Among many tribal societies, the boundary between dance and combat disappears. For instance, the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania leap in vertical rhythm to demonstrate combat prowess. The Haka of the Maori in New Zealand is a war dance intimidation through unity, rhythm, and ferocity. The Dam of the Hausa people in West Africa is a boxing art rooted in warrior castes, with one arm wrapped in rope, used like a hammer. Even celebratory dances often in code. Battle stances, evasion footwork, symbolic strikes. To dance was to declare readiness. To move was to remember. Warrior codes, rites, and spirits. Though these tribal arts lacked written manuals, they were rich in oral tradition and symbolism. Initiation. Young warriors were initiated through grueling physical and psychological trials. Strength was not enough, character mattered. Spirit possession. Some African martial systems involved trance states, where fighters called upon ancestral spirits for power, guidance, and endurance. Sacred weapons. Weapons were often blessed, passed down, or linked to mythic ancestors. A spear was never just a spear. It was part of the cosmos. Death and afterlife. Warriors often believed in honorable death, where how you died mattered more than whether you survived. This code echoes Bushido, Norse valor, and Spartan ethos. They did not write their techniques in ink. They sang them. They danced them. They bled them into earth and flame. And though few wear belts or GIs, make no mistake, these were martial artists in the purest sense. Chapter 6. The Rise of the Gladiator. Greece, Rome, and the Martial Arts of Western Civilization. In the heart of marble cities, beneath the roar of colosseums, where muscle met blade and blood met sand, a different kind of warrior was born. He was not fighting for tribe or temple. He fought for survival, for spectacle. He was the gladiator. Martial roots in ancient Greece, the birth of sport combat. To understand Western martial arts, we must begin in ancient Greece, the land of Olympians, philosophers, and soldier poets. Greek warriors trained not just for battle, but for art excellence of body, mind, and soul. Pygmakia, ancient boxing. Fighters wrapped their fists in leather straps, called himantes, offering no padding, just protection from skin tearing. There were no rounds, weight classes, or time limits. The match ended when someone was knocked out or couldn't continue. Boxing was considered brutal, but deeply honorable. Pale, ancient wrestling. Wrestling focused on balance, throws, locks, and ground control. The goal was to make the opponent's back touch the ground 3 times. Wrestlers used technique, leverage, and agility. Power was not everything. Pankration, the first MMA, a combination of boxing and wrestling with virtually no rules. No biting, no eye gouging. Everything else? Legal? It was a test of total combat. Striking, grappling, chokes, submissions. The Olympic Games, starting in 776 BCE, were as much a martial proving ground as they were sporting celebration. Greek warriors used these arts to prepare for real warfare, and it showed. The hoplite and the phalanx, Greek battlefield martial arts. Greek martial strategy wasn't just individual, it was collective discipline. Enter the hoplite, the citizen soldier armed with dory, spear, aspis, large round shield, xiphos, short sword for close combat. Fighting in the phalanx formation, hoplites relied on unity. Shields interlocked, spears thrust overhand, movements synchronized like choreography. Martial art wasn't just about strength, it was about holding the line. Training was rigorous and philosophical. Young boys were trained in gymnastics, for agility, music, for harmony, combat drills, for discipline. From Greece to Rome, martial arts become empire. As Rome rose, it absorbed and adapted Greek martial traditions. But Roman combat arts were born in a different environment. Empire, not city-state, legions, not militias, conquest, not just defense. Rome's martial approach was methodical, brutal, and institutionalized. The Roman legionary, machine of war. The average Roman legionary was a martial artist trained in gladius combat, short stabbing sword optimized for close-quarter killing, pylon throwing, heavy javelins used to break enemy shields. Shield manipulation. The scutum was not passive. It could push, trap, and strike. Formations like the testudo, a famous tortoise formation for advancing under missile fire. Training included wooden weapons heavier than real ones, forced marches in full armor, daily sparring, and shield drills. Combat in varied terrain and conditions. This was not sport. It was preparation for real blood and iron warfare. Enter the arena. Gladiators, fighters of fate. Perhaps no martial figure is more iconic than the Roman gladiator, but the myth is only half the story. Origins. The word gladiator comes from gladius, the short Roman sword. Early gladiators were prisoners of war, slaves, or criminals. Later, free men volunteered, chasing fame and fortune. The ludus, gladiator schools. These weren't prisons, they were combat academies. Run by Lannister, who honed fighters into elite martial artists. Training included diet, recovery, psychological conditioning, and daily sparring. Styles and specialties. Each gladiator was trained in a specific style, a real martial archetype. Examples: Murmillo, large shield, gladius, and heavy armor. Threx, curved sword, small shield, and speed tactics. Retiarius, net and trident, fought without helmet or shield, relied on agility and strategy. Secutor, designed specifically to fight the Retiarius heavily armored, helmeted like a tank. Each style was designed to balance strengths and weaknesses, just like modern combat sports. But here's what made the gladiator different. He didn't just fight for victory. He fought for the crowd. Every move was part of a deadly theater. The sword was stagecraft. The blood, applause. And every man who stepped into the arena knew his life could end before sunset. Fact versus myth. Did gladiators always fight to the death? Surprisingly, no. Training a gladiator was expensive. Promoters wanted good fights, not dead investments. Many fights ended when one combatant yielded or was disarmed. But execution matches did occur often as punishment or for public spectacle. And gladiators who became stars could win freedom after years of combat. Beyond the arena were Mao martial legacy. The Roman martial mindset lived on through the Byzantine military systems, medieval sword schools and combat guilds, Renaissance fencing manuals, modern Hema revival movements. From gladius to rapier, from legion drills to modern fencing, the lineage is traceable. Codifying the West, the first martial manuals. While China had scrolls and Japan had katas, the West developed fight books, called fecht books, in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. Key figures: Fiore de Liberi, one of the earliest fencing masters. Hans Talhofer wrote detailed books on dueling techniques, wrestling, dagger use, and armored combat. George Silver advocated traditional English swordplay over foreign styles. These masters were warriors and scholars teaching with drawings, diagrams, and poetic descriptions. Why it matters. The West had martial arts too. For centuries, the myth persisted that martial arts were only Eastern. But Europe had its own sword schools, wrestling guilds, knightly combat codes, gladiator disciplines. They were just buried under time, romanticized, or forgotten. Today, Hema practitioners are reviving longsword duels, poleaxe fighting, and saber combat based directly on historical manuals. Martial arts was never exclusive. It was always human. From the arenas of Rome to the pages of dusty tomes, from the duels of knights to the fencing halls of the Renaissance. The West has always fought, with style, with science, with blood and brilliance. Let us respect martial arts and its followers.